a beginner's guide to a successful RFP. As I mentioned, my name's Gary, and I'm a senior sales manager here at Flexport with over 5 years of experience working with clients, either in their first RFP or just kind of exploring RFPs. So really excited to be leading this today. Today, we're going to be covering the freight forwarding RFP basics. This is intended for shippers with minimal experience going through the RFP process. If you're a seasoned shipper with more experience, I hope you find today's webinar informative, but I also want to recommend you register for our advanced RFP webinar on February 19th. You can find a link in the chat to register. Before we really kick things off, let's go over a few housekeeping items. On your screen, you will see a sidebar to the right of the main stage. If at any time you need assistance during the live webinar, please message us in the help chat located on this sidebar. You can also ask questions via the Q&A tab on the sidebar. Time permitting, at the end of this presentation, we'll answer a few audience questions. Be sure to get your questions in early because we definitely have time allotted for this and excited to interact. In the menu above your screen, you have two tabs. In the first tab, you can download a copy of today's slide deck. And in the second tab, there's a brief feedback survey for this webinar. We always welcome your feedback, so please fill that out before exiting the webinar so we can make sure that we can adjust and make sure you're getting the content that's helpful for you. Now, kind of a quick, brief legal note. Please keep in mind that all information provided in this session is based on the situation at this current time and may not be customized to your specific business requirements. We also recommend reaching out to a Flexport expert to discuss your particular situation. I think we all know the market shifts pretty quickly, so we're doing our best to give you real-time information, and things change pretty quickly. As I mentioned, I'm obviously the host here, Senior Sales Manager at Flexport. I'm joined by Jack Sheehan, Director of Midwest and Canada, and Konstantina Georgaki, as well is joining us, Senior Director of Business Operations. Just to run through a quick agenda here for everyone, we're going to cover, what is the logistics RFP season, RFP framework, questions to ask not only yourself, but also your freight forwarder, reviewing RFP responses, considerations to have through that, and of course, recommendations from Flexport. And then we'll close it out with some Q&A. What is logistics RFP season? It's kind of a broad term. It covers a lot of different things. You will have your traditional TPB, ISC, Asia, India, to the U.S., North America, that May 1st to April 30th. But an RFP can also be, in the air market. Different timelines can be monthly, quarterly, all sorts of different things. It is a request for a proposal to help shippers find the best solution for that time. What I always like to think through is that this is very much market driven from this as well. Depending on the capacity, the different offerings can be there. I know Jack is going to touch on this a little bit, and so is Konstantina. But it definitely varies. Traditional RFP for the ocean freight, as mentioned, starts in May 1st. And we are really getting into those negotiations right now. Next slide. The RFP framework, right? Looking at it from a high-level view, you're going to have a bid overview. This really is the high-level talking points about the bid. You can think the companies, what you need as a company, what the questions that you have from that. Then you have a request for information, right? You're reaching out to your forwarder, reaching out to the partners. What are the needs that you have from that? When you're looking at air freight, ocean freight, LCL or FCL, there's going to be different rate structures with each of those, different requirements, different validities, all sorts of scenarios in there. And those will be often covered in the additional accessorial fees down below. These will be there. This is how I often think of this kind of as like the fine print. You want to make sure that you're looking at these additional accessorial fees to really make sure that you're comparing your providers in an apples to apples scenario. And of course, as a legend, a lot of different forwarders have different names for kind of the same type things. Once again, looking to make sure you're having that similar comparison so that you can really review and do what's best for you and your company. Next slide. Questions to ask before running an RFP, right? Really sitting back and considering what's important to you and your team. I think that the top question here is probably one of the most important. What is the volume coming up? Even in the next year, or whatever that RFP period is. I mentioned that it's often an annual on the FCL market, but air can really, be as little as a month type thing. How much of that do you have? How much can you forecast it? And what's the predictability of that forecast? Understanding this yourself so that you can share that with your potential partners will help you get the best offering possible. Because once you have that understanding of the forecast, you can then start to figure out, okay, how much do I want to have under that RFP, under that named account rate versus do I want to have in the floating market? And really trying to figure out what's best and working with your potential provider for that. Second, of course, what are you trying to accomplish? Right? I think I've worked with a lot of companies that kind of see, hey, let me do an RFP, let me get fixed rates so that I can have, the silver bullet for my supply chain. It's not really quite how it works, right? You're looking to solve a problem. You need to be asking those questions. What is that? Is it consistent uplift, consistent departures? Is it rates? What's the balance that you're looking for? Is it more, hey, I'd rather have more forecasting in my cost than the lowest cost at all times? It's a lot of these things to consider when you're going through that and trying to figure out what's best for you. And then, of course, how are you going to make your decision? Understanding that process so that you can share that with your partner, your potential provider, so that they can do their best to accommodate. Right? Of course, once again, puts all that together as far as the forecast. What technology solutions are you looking for? There's a lot more to than just, hey, just moving the freight. And then, of course, how many rounds are going to have? I've worked with people who have clients that have 3-4 different rounds of the RFP, and I've had some that just do one. So a lot of different options out there, setting that process. And once again, being very upfront with your potential providers so that they can really follow the timeline that you're setting to get you the solution that's best for you. Next. Reviewing the RFP responses, right? Really goes back to how many rounds, what is that RFP process that you set for yourself? So then we're going to talk about how you go about that. Of course, you're going to get them presented in multiple different ways. I've seen a lot of clients kind of force us to put the information on a spreadsheet that matches all the others. Well, once again, what are you considering through that? There's a lot more to this than just what's listed on a spreadsheet. So we think a lot about tech enablement. What's the visibility that you have? What's the workflow for that RFP submission? How's your freight going to move? How's that year going to go? How's that forwarder potential partner going to be able to support that? Right? What's their account management behind that? How's their operations team? What are your expectations in communication, reporting? So many different things than just, hey, here's a bid on an RFP. Think a lot about transparency and cost and reporting. As we kind of mentioned, those apples to apples comparison, making sure that you are looking at it, you're aware of what's coming. Different acronyms, can really be confusing at times. So really getting that consistent so that you can manage it, and it'll match the expectations that you set. And then, of course, for your RFP, what is the solution that you're looking for? Is it an end-to-end solution? Is it just port to port? Is it drayage? Is it just one leg? What is it? Right? Really measuring that so that you can decide what's best for you at that time. Next. RFP considerations. Kicking this one over to Jack here is going to come on stage.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. And hi, everybody. My name is Jack Sheehan. I am the Director of Ocean Freight for the Northeast, Midwest, and Canada here at Flexport. Been with the company for about 8 years. And prior to this, I worked on the steamship line side of things. So really, my team and I work with our customers to develop pricing strategies that work for their business needs. And one of those, probably the most common strategies is annual fixed rates. Something I like to clarify, very early on and just kind of think at a basic level of what is happening in the trade-off of a fixed annual rate. Right? You have the shippers and importers who are providing consistent weekly volumes, and you have the steamship lines who are providing a consistent annual rate. That rate is not always going to be the cheapest rate in the market, and it is also not always going to be the cheapest solution for a given type of cargo, right? So when you ship your cargo matters vary significantly. So, right, so if you are, let's say, for example, a company who ships summer products that ship in, mid Q1 to mid Q2, that is generally a time when the floating market is below the fixed market. And so you might actually see some cost savings by utilizing floating rates versus fixing those rates. Another thing to consider is the type of cargo that you're moving. So if you are, we say that fixed rates generally work for your kind of boring cargo, your inventory replenishments, like Gary was saying, right? Your cargo that is very forecastable and predictable. It does not work as well for new product SKUs, products where the forecast is just not there, or it's impossible to forecast because you have a sales team that's constantly blowing their numbers out of the water. Right, in those scenarios where generally speed is the most important thing for those products, floating is usually the rate type that we would suggest for you, because regardless of what the rate level is, there is always space to buy on the floating market. All right, so we can go to the next slide. Okay, so we'll talk about some of the main perks, I'd say, of annual fixed rates. And really, there's two main ones. You're going to hear me say the word consistency a lot throughout this presentation, and that is, I think, the word that I want you to remember from this is that it's all about consistency, right? So you have the rate consistency side of things, where you have a fixed rate that allows you to forecast your freight costs for the year. And it also has the added benefit of reducing your exposure to the spot market during those peak months when the floating rates can be significantly higher than the fixed annual rates. The reality of rate consistency is that rates are never 100% fixed. There are elements to all fixed rates that fluctuate throughout the year. So probably the most common is the fuel surcharge or bunker or BAF, right? That generally changes on either a monthly or quarterly basis. You also have situational surcharges, so things like peak season surcharge. This year we saw emergency work stoppage surcharges. Right? These are surcharges that may or may not happen in a given year, but when they do happen, they can be multiple hundred to multiple thousands of dollars, and so they have a significant impact on your ability to forecast your finances for your freight. So very important to understand that just because you are locking in a rate does not mean that that is going to be a perfect representation of your budget for that product for the year. The final thing on rate consistency is that your loadings, so the amount that you're able to use this fixed rate, is really dependent on your consistency of using that rate. So if during those times when the spot market drops below the fixed market, if you move over to the spot market to take advantage of those cost benefits, you'll likely find some difficulty with trying to move back onto your fixed rate once the market has turned and the spot market is more expensive than the fixed. So, right, using your fixed rate consistently week over week across the year is really going to guarantee that you get the most out of it that you possibly can. And then the second big perk is sailing consistency. So right on the floating or the spot side of the market, you have access to everything. You have access to any carrier, any string. On the fixed side, you are locking into a specific 1, 2, 3 sailing strings and services. This is great because it brings some predictability into your supply chain, right? Predictable cutoff timelines, predictable timelines for your shippers, predictable timelines for planning labor, both at your shippers and your receiving facilities. So right, it allows everyone to get into a rhythm and sort of smooths things out. Now, the reality of sailing consistency, I feel like I probably don't need to tell anyone this, but in the past couple of years, right, it's been a difficult couple of years for sailing consistency. We've had major market situations like the Red Sea closures and Cape of Good Hope reroutings, Panama Canal draft issues, global port congestion. And so we've seen that what really was one of the main selling points of fixed rates previously maybe has a bit less weight to it now that the consistency can't be relied upon as much. All right, next slide. Okay, and then thinking about this from the ocean freight, from the carrier side of things, right, what are they looking for? From a volume standpoint, this really changes year over year, depends on the market situation. In years where the market is expected to be extremely strong, carriers might have a higher requirement for how much space they are willing to fix. In years with softer predictions for the market, there might be slightly lower thresholds for what they're willing to fix. But at an absolute minimum, you should think about the fact that in order to have an annual fixed rate, you need weekly volume. So, right, at least 1 or 2 containers per week throughout the year. There's always going to be some seasonality to that and some differences week over week. But that is the bare minimum that you should think about when you're considering, does this make sense for my supply chain? The carriers are, right, they're thinking about, or they have these volume requirements because they are looking for this consistent base load cargo for their vessels and strings that really they don't have to think about, right? This is the cargo that's going to show up week over week. It allows them to set, their pricing for the spot market, and it allows them to have confidence that they're going to be able to run this service week over week. So, right, they are flexible to minor variations in demand, but it's difficult if week over week things are changing, very significantly. I'd say more than 10 or 20%. At Flexport, we work with all of our clients who are on fixed rates to get monthly forecasts, to have those conversations with carriers to say, hey, right, here's the realities of this business. And so that's a really important part of fixed rates, is keeping close communication with Flexport or whoever your freight forwarder provider is to make sure that they're aware of changes that happen throughout the year. All right, next slide. Okay, so looking at rate validities, we're going to talk about, there's 3 kind of main validities. I'm really going to focus mainly on annual because that is by far the most common. Quarterly and 6-month rates are available in the market, I would say at times, and they're not always available on all trades. What we see quarterly and 6-month rates being effective for are things like highly seasonal cargo, right? So that example from the first slide of you're shipping summer products that are only going to ship really across 1 quarter of the year. Things like project volume, construction projects, things like that. In this year and in the past couple of years, another great example of where quarterly and 6-month rates can work well are if you know that you're going to be changing your supplier base halfway through the year, right? So you know that you have a lane from Shanghai to LA that you're producing a certain SKU, and in September, you're going to shift that production to Vietnam or to India. That lane would not be a good fit for an annual rate. And so, right, talk to us about the quarterly, 6-month, or maybe spot, depending on the seasonality and where we are in terms of peak seasons. All right, so as far as annual rates, Gary made mention of this earlier, but for the Trans-Pacific eastbound, so Asia to the US and Canada, the rate validity is May 1st to April 30th. That means that the rate negotiation period is really just about to start. March is really like the main month for rate negotiations to happen. But if you are considering, an annual rate or an RFP, you should talk to your Flexport team basically starting now, right? In February. They're going to ask for a forecast on a port pair level and on a monthly level. So from Shanghai to Chicago on a monthly level, how many containers do you have? They'll ask you questions about the type of cargo that it is, your business goals, and right, we'll be able to come up with what strategies we think might best suit you. All right, and one more slide. Cool. So Gary also mentioned this a little bit, but I just want to reiterate with some ocean-specific things here to focus on. So, right, we've talked about how no rate is totally fixed. There's things like your bunker adjustment factor, that's your fuel, that will change throughout the year. There are kind of standard charges like AMS, ISPS that are charged across all carriers, but there are different ways that carriers will present those. And then you have your situational surcharges. The one type of offering that I think it's important to kind of be on the lookout for is something called fixed subject to GRI. A GRI is a general rate increase, and it's generally something that we see on the spot market. It's more of a term for the spot market. And GRIs can happen, and in most markets happen every 2 weeks. So another way to read this would be fixed, subject to change every 2 weeks. It's really, really important to meet with your providers and talk to your providers about the rates that they're putting forward and the proposals that they're putting forward to understand how do they plan to support your business, what is backing this, and really, right, talk about your business goals, the fluctuations in your forecast, things that you're worried about. It's really all about communicating, effectively and consistently with your partners to make sure that you understand what you're signing up for and that you have a successful year and are able to utilize it as much as possible. All right, and that is it for the ocean freight side of things. I will kick it over to Konstantina.
Let's talk air freight. Hello, everybody. My name is Konstantina Georgaki, and I lead air freight business operations globally. And I'm excited to walk you through the 4 main pricing structures we see in air freight, walk you through the characteristics of each one, and then talk through which ones are right for you given how many volumes you have, what kind of consistency, the way Jack talked about, you're expecting in air freight, and then what fits your budget. All right, so the 4 rate options are the fixed rate deal, the short-term deal, the bid pricing, and market-based pricing. And by the end of the section, I hope you have a good understanding of each one. Let's go to the next one. So first off, we have the fixed rate deal. So what this does, kind of what the name says, it guarantees space over an extended period of time, and it commits to a specific transit time performance. So when we say extended period of time, here would be 6 months or longer. So typically in air freight, the RFPs are a little bit on the shorter horizon versus ocean. So this one would be on the longer tail of for air freight, which would be between 6 months and 1 year. So that's your fixed rate deal, and it's best suited for customers that require a large volume uplift. They have big volumes throughout the year, not so much seasonality, and they won't fix economics. That means that they have a budget, their CFO, or maybe you're a one-man show or a one-person show, have a very fixed budget in mind, so that would be a fixed rate deal for you. Let's examine the second one. So the second one will be the short-term deal. So the short-term deal would be, let's say, a month long deal or quarterly long deal. And for that bid period, you have a fixed price, but it doesn't guarantee you the space. So it gives you somewhat of a flexibility and somewhat of a peace of mind because you have a rate for that period of time that you can book against. But let's say if the market becomes really hot and you have like the cheaper rate versus the spot rate that will prevail, then you might get bumped off the flight. So this is best for customers that cannot commit to volumes. Let's say they're a growing business, it's growing really fast, they're not sure where it's going, or you're affected by a lot of seasonality, you're not so sure, you cannot commit to a volume that's more in line for you. So the third type will be a hybrid in between these two. So a hybrid between the short-term deal and the long-term deal, and we call it bid pricing. So we see a lot of this. It could vary a lot in terms of its length structure. It could be 3 months, 6 months. We sometimes get 1 month. So what it really does is a soft commitment for capacity, so you have a little more leverage on that versus the short-term deal. It gives you a fixed price over that period of time, and it's really for customers that are looking for flexibility. They have some volumes to put on the table and negotiate, and they're looking to have that flexibility in their supply chain. So the fourth instrument is the market-based capacity deal. So how this works is that you have a price that you're pegging to a publicly available index. So there are a couple of those in the market, and then you will talk with your logistics provider, choose the one that you want to follow, and peg your RFP contract to that index, and then that guarantees you the space for that validity of the bid, and it commits to a specific transit time, so you can have a very good view of your supply chain, how it will move. However, that exposes you completely to the market fluctuation. So let's say the market shoots up, then your rate will shoot up with it. If the market goes down, you're gonna enjoy those savings as well. So what we typically see is that customers that have large volumes might go for that. It's the least common instrument versus the other three because it does have a lot of exposure on it, and it might be hard at some point to explain why you overshot a budget because the market really turned and you were very exposed to it. So these were the four instruments. Just to recap across the four, we got the long-term deal, which is the most sort of like guaranteed in terms of price, and but you do need to come in with a volume commitment with it, typically 6 months or longer, typically 1 year. You have the short-term deal, which doesn't guarantee the space. It gives you, let's say, your price for the month, which is maximum flexibility. Then you have the bid pricing, which is the hybrid of the two, and we do see a lot of these in the market. And lastly, what's on the slide right here, the market-based capacity deal, full exposure to the market fluctuations in the price, and really for shippers that have lots of volumes to commit and some appetite for risk. Let's go to the next one. All right, so I want to give you some overall Flexport recommendations across your RFP cycle, whether it's ocean, whether it's air, or even if it's tracking. So the first thing you want to do is to make sure that the service that you want to have matches the expectations that you put forward. So you want to give as much information as you can on the lanes that you have. So what are the Incoterms, what are the transit times, and get really specific with those. So you might have different transit times on different strings, on different lanes. If you have specific handling requirements, if you have like any cargo that is dangerous goods or oversized, you want to explain as much as possible as you can for your product. So if you have like a missing detail, then that might create a little bit of a back and forth, and you would avoid the delays if you have like a complete roster of information. So the second thing that you want to do is schedule time to meet with a logistics provider that you invited to your RFP. So a good logistics provider will come to the table with lots of questions, suggestions, like they will show curiosity for your supply chain. They will want to understand how you move freight, what you've done in the past, and they will come with suggestions of how you can look at things differently, how to save you money, how to secure your transit time. So definitely engage, try to understand the recommendations, compare across the providers, and try to get in business with somebody that really leans into your supply chain. Lastly, it's not just about the price and just about the transit time. Have a look at the technology they're providing. So let's say now you've engaged in a bid and you're in business with this provider. How are you going to track your shipments? How are you going to get invoiced? How are you going to communicate with them? How are you going to send them messages? You want to be able to demo the technology and understand how are you going to consume the information and be able to track your business in the most seamless way possible. You'll also have some requirements in terms of reporting. So we do a lot of quarterly business reviews with customers. So you want to line up front what are the KPIs you want to see in those QBRs, and also what are your expectations in terms of like weekly reporting, monthly reporting, quarterly reporting. So line that all out and make your expectations clear upfront. And then ask for a contingency plan. So in logistics, nothing goes perfectly all the time. It's a business of exceptions. So you want to ask also the tough questions to your provider. So ask them, how do you deal when you get bumped of a plane or of a vessel? How do you deal with like damaged shipments? How do you deal with like a shipment stuck in the port? So ask these questions, understand if they're giving you like a good contingency plan, if their SOPs are robust. And I would also say, ask them for references. Ask them who else have they worked with in your industry that you look up to, or you feel like it's a good analogy for your business, and understand if that would work for you. All right. So I hope you got a lot out of these presentations. I'll hand it off back to Gary to guide us through Q&A. And we have a good 15 minutes on that.
Now it's kind of the Q&A here. We got a few minutes left, so we're going to kind of dive in. Jack, I'm going to shoot the first one your way, coming in from Oliver. What are some of the ways that one can forecast? And a little bit, interesting question too. And are there any machine learning models that are prevalent these days?
Great question. I'd say in terms of forecasting, right, it's about connecting with as many folks within your organization and your vendor partners as you can. So connecting with your marketing team, your sales team, your finance team, right? Like what does the outlook for the year look like? Are there new products that are launching? Are there new campaigns that are launching and new partnerships? I think looking at historical performance, if you're able to do that, assuming that it's a product that you have shipped previously, look at your forecast from last year versus what actualized, and try to pinpoint right where were the misses there and try to correct them moving forward. I think the underlying piece of all of this is that things change, right? There's parts of your business that are going to change. Your forecast is going to change. I talked about this a little bit in my section, but providing consistent, up-to-date forecasts to your forwarder, your logistics providers when things do change, and just keeping that conversation open at all times is really, I think, extremely important, because right, just as quickly as your forecast can change, the market can change as well. And so just making sure that everyone's on the same page and are able to push for whatever's going to meet your business goals the best. In terms of specific machine learning tools that are popular in the market, I am, I'd say, admittedly not an expert on that. I'm not sure, Konstantina or Gary, if either of you are aware of any, but in my opinion, I think sticking with the kind of old school way of building forecasts is probably the most effective for now.
I would agree with that, Jack. I mean, I think, it takes a lot of data to get into a machine learning aspect. So, and on this beginner RFP, it's kind of hard to have that data, from previous years. And I would say too, kind of to Jack's point on the forecasting things, yes, try to forecast that year in advance. That will help you get the most suitable solution for you. But then obviously things will change in that year. Passing that updated forecast along to your forwarder, to your provider, will go a long ways throughout the year as well. So it's not just a one-time forecast. Especially what I've seen and what I've done over the last 5 years is these are typically high growth companies that are doing their best to forecast, but it's a really big challenge, right? You know, Q4 demand, peak season type things, seasonality that Jack talked about was like summer brand products type things can change in a hurry. So passing that along throughout the year will always help as well. Konstantina, I'm going to come to you with the next question here. Question is, since the pandemic, we have received weekly rate updates on our air import rates from Asia. Is it time to ask for longer validity periods? If so, what validity period makes sense for air freight from Asia?
First, I want to say that my crystal ball is broken again today, but I will say that the market is even more interesting and harder to sort of like put a finger on it this year. We have a lot of like regulatory changes hitting together. So it's very unpredictable. I will say I haven't heard a ton of customers doing weekly rates, if that's what you meant, like doing kind of pure spot. It's always a blend of like a spot and fixed rate in air freight. So I would, if you like to have a specific follow-up just to understand the supply chain, maybe that would be a little bit better because the market is I think is very volatile again in 25 and depending on your supply chain, like if you have a lot of like seasonal goods or if you expect sort of like more steady state or more growth, would be a little bit of like a different recommendation. And you could do different things for different lanes as well. You don't have to like go for all or nothing, I would say.
That makes sense. Konstantina, I'm going to stick with you on this one too. Can you share some of the air market indexes?
Yeah, sure. So there are a few, two that come top of mind. It's called the TAC index, and another one is the CAS index. And what happens when you use those indices in the RFP negotiation is that the provider and yourself will look at your supply chain, look at the trades that you move in. Some indices are more strong in some lanes than others, meaning more predictive of what's actually going on. And then also depending on how much volume you'll have, then it will be a sort of like an exercise of where do you peg to the index? Like, do you peg exactly to the index? Do you peg like 5 points below the index? It's just to give you like a sort of like an indication, not an exact number. And then what you want to do is track on that every, like an aggregator. So let's say every 2 weeks or every month, and then say, where did the index pan out? And then there's some sort of like invoicing and adjustments that you want to do with that. The caveat with any index is that there is a little bit of lag to it. So whatever the index says happen is reflective typically of like 2 weeks before or like 1 month before. So there's always like a little bit of a lag between what's happening in the market and what's reflective in the index. So I would say it is really for large shippers that understand this a little bit, like have sort of like graduated from using like the short-term bid and the long-term bid and the hybrid bid, and now they have the volumes and they want to try this instrument because it's a little more complicated to administer and it's also harder to explain, let's say, to the CFO if you went for that. So I would say it's a little bit of an advanced use, but if you go down that path, then can examine the index, sit down with the provider, do your homework, like where you want to kind of like put your mark on that index, and then be prepared for some a little bit of added overhead to administer the index on both sides.
Thank you. I think this one was mostly geared towards ocean, so I'm going to kick it to Jack first, but we're going to then also to you, Konstantina, to answer this kind of the same question with air. So question is, what is Flexport's outlook for the market condition in 2026? Do you expect the same uncertainty as we experienced in 24/25? Like I said, ocean first with you, Jack, and then we'll talk about the air as well.
Yeah, very good question. I think on the ocean side of things, I would say that we are expecting it to be a a similarly volatile year, but for different reasons. Right, there was a lot of volatility in 2024 that was caused by things like the potential ILA strike, right, the Red Sea closures, the Panama Canal draft issues. There were sort of those pulled forward peak seasons that happened because of kind of a combination of a number of those things. In 2025, we have the alliance changes that just happened, or sort of starting to happen as of February 1st. So a good amount of shifting across services, probably a good number of blank sailings that will follow that. The Red Sea is still, effectively closed, and carriers are not utilizing that. There's a potential that with the ceasefire in the Middle East, that the Red Sea may reopen by, at some point this year. Carriers are still don't have any immediate plans to move through the Red Sea. And obviously that is a very fluid situation. So that will, it will either be continued volatility of not moving through the Red Sea and having these reroutings, but also if the Red Sea were to open, that would also have a pretty significant impact on the market. And then the one that's changing kind of day to day is tariffs. Right, the tariffs have been almost immediate. There hasn't been really any ability for the market to kind of beat the tariffs, or for there to be any pulling forward of cargo to try to beat an implementation date, at least on the ocean side of things. And so there's a potential that if there were a tariff that were announced, let's say 3 or 4 months out, that you might see a shifting of volume on the ocean side. But that hasn't been the case yet.
Konstantina, any insight on you mentioned this a little bit in the previous question on the rate conversation, but anything on the outlook for 25, 26 with air?
So first of all, in air, so air typically follows with a little bit of a lag what happens in the ocean market. So let's say if the ocean market were to become softer because the Suez Canal opens, there's more sort of like capacity on the market, that affects air, and the air market will become a little softer if that were to happen. I will say the key piece with the air market in 25 is the de minimis regulation that has been suspended, but now is on pause for the next few weeks and likely will go again into suspension. And what this does is that in 24, we saw a pretty hot market in terms of air freight rates, and that was very much buoyant from the very strong e-commerce demand. So if under the minimis being suspended, you could expect a potential a impact on the e-commerce demand. I say potential because it's hard to know, because consumers will like these products, so you're not exactly sure how it's gonna pan out. But let's assume that if that were to happen, then you would expect also the market rates to soften versus 24. And then depending where that might happen, you also might see like a pull forward of demand. So you might see like more of a spike in the short term when sort of like the cargo comes in, and the market will soften after it. And then again, that's also speculative, like how the actual end consumer will react. If they still are very bullish on what they want, then the rates will behave sort of like accordingly. So it's hard to say on the rate environment. I think volatility is the right word for 25. But I think in the RFP instruments, there's sort of like ways to go about it, and hedge if that's what you want, or like stick with the market if that's acceptable for your organization. So there's like always ways to navigate these kinds of environments.
Thank you. We're coming up on time here, but I do want to ask, I want to ask Jack this one question. I think it's really crucial because it comes up a lot when I'm talking to clients exploring their first RFP. So it's probably be our our final one was kind of a two-parter. So one, Jack, just explaining fixed rates. Is it the same as a NAC rate, named account rate? And second one, what happens when you overcommit or undercommit on your MQC? Those are great questions. So I want to make sure we hit those, even if we go a little over.
Yeah. Okay. So fixed and NAC. I think Gary mentioned this at the beginning, that you need a legend of all the different acronyms and terminology that providers use. I would say ask your provider what they mean by fixed and NAC. Right? Fixed is generally just means you have a rate that will not fluctuate for a certain period of time. NAC is sort of the shorthand, like acronym for a named account, which in a lot of cases is what a carrier or forwarder might call an account that has a fixed rate. So they are the same in a good number of cases, but if there is any confusion, I would just ask your carrier or freight forwarder partner. And then the question of what happens if you overcommit or undercommit on your contract. It depends on the year, I would say, and depends on the market. If you are tracking towards undercommitting or overcommitting, a good logistics partner will reach out to you and say, hey, we are pacing in a way that's different than what we talked about. Right? Has something changed about your business? Has something changed about the forecast? Has something changed with, the service level that you're unhappy with? But there really should be a conversation pretty early on. I would say within the first month or so of not pacing correctly towards that initial awarded volume. As far as over committing in certain markets, like last year was a very tight market for fixed space. There would need to be a conversation to say, hey, I had awarded you 500 containers. It's now going to be, can it be 600 containers? And have a conversation with your forwarder about that to see, are they able to support that on the contract? Is it maybe like a fixed rate plus an additional amount to get the support from the carrier side? Right. It's, so that would be in like a tight market. In a situation where you are potentially going to underperform, just something to think about long term is repetitively underperforming. Right. So if you are consistently signing up for 500 containers, but you only show up with 200 or 300 containers, eventually that will probably follow you around a little bit. Right? You don't want to be seen as someone who is overcommitting and consistently underperforming. But again, right, things change with businesses day to day. It's really just about communicating those changes and making sure that everyone's on the same page of performance.
And I would say that's key. Just echoing what Jack said again, right? That transparency and that open communication. If you're going to be a little bit over or below, as soon as you can pass that along for that week, helps out the forwarder, helps out the carrier, helps out everyone involved, instead of kind of just showing up that week with something different. I know we're over. Really appreciate all the great questions. We have a few that we didn't get to. We can reach out directly and handle those for that. I really hope everyone thought this was informative, enjoyed it. And that concludes today's webinar. Please share your feedback in the survey link above. We will email everyone a link to the recording tomorrow morning. Thanks again, and hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.